"Servants' children don't belong at this table," the fiancé shouted. Then the billionaire froze. "Hey, stop scrolling for a second. Because what I'm about to tell you happened at one of the most expensive dinner tables in all of New York City. A 3-year-old little girl, tiny hands, big brown eyes, sitting in a chair that probably cost more than most people's rent. And a woman, beautiful, polished, perfectly dressed, looked at that baby and said words so cold, so cruel, that every single person in that room went completely still. But here's the thing nobody saw coming. That billionaire at the head of the table. He didn't say a single word. He just froze. And what happened in the next 60 seconds? Changed everything. Welcome back, everyone. If this is your first time here, I am so glad you found us because this channel is home to some of the most emotional, heartwarming, and unforgettable human stories you will ever hear. Before we get into today's story, drop a comment right now and tell me, where are you watching from? Which city, which state, which country? I genuinely love reading every single one of your answers. Now listen. Today's story is unlike anything I've shared before. It involves wealth, power, a secret, a cruel moment, and a love so unexpected it will leave you completely speechless. This is the story of a billionaire, a maid, a 3-year-old little girl named Lily, and one dinner that shattered an entire life. Stay with me. Every single second of this story matters. She was just the maid. Or at least, that's what everyone believed. His name was Daniel Mercer. 35 years old. Dark hair, sharp jaw, the kind of man who walked into a room and made the whole room reorganize itself around him without even trying. He was the CEO of Mercer Capital Group, a real estate and investment empire worth somewhere north of $4 billion. He had offices in Manhattan, a penthouse on the Upper East Side, a beach house in the Hamptons, and a private jet that logged more miles in a year than most families drive in a lifetime. By every measurement the world uses to define success, Daniel Mercer had won. But if you watched him closely, and I mean really closely, you'd notice something the magazine covers always missed. His eyes. Even in the most celebrated photos, even at the galas and the ribbon cuttings and the Forbes interviews, his eyes looked like a man searching for something he couldn't name. People who worked closely with him said he was brilliant but distant, generous with money, careful with emotion. He paid his staff exceptionally well, rarely raised his voice, and had a rule that almost no other executive in New York followed. He learned every employee's name. Every single one. From the head of acquisitions to the overnight security guard. He knew their names. His head housekeeper, Margaret, had worked for him for 6 years. She managed a small staff that kept the penthouse running, a chef who came 3 times a week, a driver named Roy, and a maid named Carmen. Carmen Reyes was 28 years old. Originally from San Antonio, Texas. She'd moved to New York 4 years earlier chasing a nursing degree that life kept interrupting with rent bills and reality. She was quiet, hardworking, warm in the way that people are warm when they've learned that warmth costs nothing and means everything. She had a daughter, Lily, 3 years old, born on a Tuesday in February, with her mother's brown eyes and a laugh that sounded like someone shaking a jar of sunshine. Carmen didn't bring Lily to work. Ever. That was her rule, not Daniel's. She kept her worlds separated with the careful discipline of a woman who understood the distance between employer and employee and respected it completely. But one Thursday afternoon in October, the daycare called. Lily had a fever. Mild, the nurse said. Nothing serious. But policy was policy. She needed to be picked up immediately. Carmen's sister, her usual backup, was stuck on a delayed train from Philadelphia. Her neighbor wasn't answering. Her phone was down to 4% battery. Margaret, who had watched Carmen panic quietly for 11 minutes, said 4 words. Just bring her in. Carmen hesitated for a long moment. Then she wrapped Lily in her little yellow jacket, buckled her into the stroller, and took the crosstown bus to the Upper East Side. She arrived at the penthouse at 2:47 in the afternoon. Daniel was supposed to be in a meeting in Midtown until 6. He was not. The meeting had ended early, and Daniel had come home to review contract documents in the quiet of his study. He heard the elevator open. He heard Margaret's voice, softer than usual. And then he heard something he had not heard in that apartment in the entire 6 years he had owned it. Child's laugh. He walked out of the study. And there, sitting on the living room floor surrounded by couch cushions that Carmen was clearly mortified about, was a tiny little girl with brown eyes and 2 uneven pigtails, holding one of his architectural magazines upside down with the absolute confidence of someone who had no idea what it was but had decided it was hers now. She looked up at him. He looked down at her. "Hi," she said. Just like that. No hesitation. No shyness. "Hi." Carmen appeared from the kitchen doorway, face pale, apology already forming on her lips. "Mr. Mercer, I'm so sorry. Her daycare called, she has a slight fever and I couldn't reach anyone. I will take her home immediately, this will never." "What's her name?" Daniel asked. Carmen blinked. "Lily." He looked back at the little girl, who had now set the magazine down and was studying him with the focused intensity of a toddler who has just decided you are interesting. "Hi, Lily," he said. He grinned. And something in Daniel Mercer's chest, something that had been packed away in a box and stored in a room he didn't visit, shifted. Just slightly. Just enough. He told Carmen to stay. He went back to his study. But twice in the next hour, without meaning to, he found himself standing in the doorway watching that little girl reorganize his living room like she owned the place. And the second time very quietly, so quietly that he wasn't sure Carmen heard him, he laughed. Nobody knew that a 3-year-old was slowly dismantling a wall that $4 billion had built. After that Thursday, things shifted. Not dramatically. Not in a way you could point to and describe. It was subtle, like the way light changes in a room when someone opens a window just an inch. Carmen still came to work. Still cleaned. Still kept her careful professional distance. But Margaret, with the quiet permission of someone who had worked for Daniel long enough to read between every line he'd ever written, stopped enforcing the invisible rule. If Lily needed to come, Lily came. It happened 3 more times over the following 6 weeks. Each time, Daniel was either not home or briefly home and barely visible. But small things accumulated. A set of wooden blocks appeared in the corner of the living room. Daniel said nothing about them. Margaret raised one eyebrow and said nothing either. A little step-stool appeared near the kitchen sink, the exact right height for a 3-year-old to stand at and watch with her chin on the counter. A soft yellow blanket, folded neatly, on the end of the couch closest to the window where the afternoon light came in warmest. Carmen noticed all of it. She said nothing. "'Cause what do you say? How do you address something that exists only in small, deniable gestures from a man who would probably never acknowledge any of them?" Lily, for her part, was completely unbothered by the grandness of the penthouse or the strangeness of the situation. She was 3. The carpet was soft. Sometimes there were grapes in the kitchen. The man with the dark hair said hi to her every time he saw her and once, memorably, had gotten down on the floor to build a block tower that Lily had immediately knocked over while laughing so hard she fell sideways. He had laughed too. Carmen, watching from the hallway, had felt something pull in her chest that she immediately, firmly put away. She was not foolish. She was a maid. He was a billionaire. She was a single mother from San Antonio. He was the cover of Fortune magazine. She understood the geography of their lives completely, and she had no desire to embarrass herself, lose her job, or give her heart to a direction it had no business traveling. But she was human. And he was kind to her daughter. And kindness, when you've been doing everything alone for 3 years, lands differently than anything else in the world. Then, in November, Daniel Mercer announced his engagement. Her name was Victoria Langston. 31 years old. Old New York family money. Columbia MBA. Stunning in the way of women who have always been told they are stunning and have organized their entire personality around confirming it. She wore a 4-carat emerald-cut diamond that caught the light in every photo that went up on page 6 the morning after the announcement. The staff heard the news from Margaret, who delivered it the way she delivered everything, directly and without drama. Carmen nodded and said congratulations. Then she went to the supply closet and stood very still for about 90 seconds. Then she went back to work. Victoria began appearing at the penthouse regularly. She was not warm to the staff. She was not cruel either. Not yet. She simply operated as though household employees existed in a slightly different visual layer of reality. She looked through them rather than at them. She spoke to Margaret with the crisp efficiency of someone placing an order, not addressing a person. She had never once spoken directly to Carmen. Which was fine. Carmen did not need to be spoken to. She needed her paycheck and her health insurance and the flexible hours that let her be home when Lily woke up from her afternoon nap. Then came the dinner. Victoria was planning the first formal dinner she would host as Daniel's fiancée. Saturday in December. 12 guests. Some of Manhattan's most recognizable names in finance and philanthropy. A statement dinner, Margaret understood immediately. A performance of the life Victoria was stepping into. The staff was needed that Saturday. All of them. Carmen arranged for her sister to watch Lily. Her sister cancelled at noon. Nobody warned the little girl. Nobody warned the billionaire. And nobody warned Victoria about what was coming. By 4 p.m. the penthouse smelled like rosemary and warm butter and expensive candles. The table in the formal dining room had been set with a precision that Margaret described later as museum quality. 12 place settings. Crystal glasses. Flowers flown in from somewhere that was definitely not a bodega. A string quartet had been arranged for the entryway. Carmen had been on her feet since 7 that morning. 4:15 her phone rang. It was her sister. The car wouldn't start. She was stuck in Queens. She was so sorry. She'd tried calling everyone she knew. She was so sorry. Carmen stood in the hallway outside the kitchen, phone pressed to her ear, doing the quiet arithmetic of a woman with no options. She could leave. She could tell Margaret she had no childcare and had to go. But this was the biggest event the household had hosted in 2 years. Margaret was already stretched thin. The chef had burned the first batch of pastry shells. One of the servers had called in sick. Carmen leaving now would not just be inconvenient, it would genuinely hurt people she cared about. She called her neighbor. No answer. She called the backup sitter. Book. She stood there for another moment. Then she called her sister back and said, "Bring her." Lily arrived at 5:30 p.m. in her best dress. A soft burgundy velvet thing with a white collar that Carmen had bought on clearance after Christmas last year. Her hair was in 2 neat braids. She was holding a small stuffed elephant named Gerald that she carried everywhere. Carmen settled her in the small staff sitting room near the kitchen with a plate of crackers, a cup of juice, Gerald, and her little tablet loaded with her favorite show. "You stay here, baby. You stay quiet. Mama is working." Lily nodded with immense seriousness. The dinner began at 7. The guests were everything you'd expect. Polished, loud in the confident way of people who have never been told to be quiet, wives in designer dresses, husbands in suits that cost as much as Carmen's monthly rent. Victoria was radiant. She moved through the room like she had been rehearsing for this specific evening for her entire life. Daniel was present but quieter, the way he always was in social settings. Gracious, attentive, but watching the room more than participating in it. At 7:45 Lily got bored. She was 3. Course she got bored. Gerald had been fully examined. The crackers were gone. The tablet had gone to the screensaver. And somewhere beyond the door was warmth and noise and the smell of food that was much better than crackers. No one heard the door open. The first person to see her was a woman named Patricia, one of the dinner guests, who looked up from her soup and saw a tiny girl in a burgundy velvet dress standing in the entrance to the dining room, clutching a stuffed elephant, looking at the table with enormous curious eyes. Patricia made a soft sound that was half surprise, half delight. Daniel looked up. When he saw Lily, something moved across his face. Something warm and unguarded that came and went before most people could name it. "Hey, Lilybug," he said quietly. Like it was the most natural thing in the world. The table had gone pleasantly curious. The way adults go when a child wanders into an unexpected space. A few guests smiled. Someone said, "Oh, how sweet." And then Victoria turned. She looked at Lily the way you look at something that has been placed in the wrong location. She looked at Daniel, then back at Lily. Then she said it. "Servants' children don't belong at this table." The room went still. Not the polite still of people waiting for the next thing. The deep, uncomfortable still of people who have just witnessed something they wish they hadn't. Lily, who was 3 and did not understand the word servants, looked up at the beautiful lady in the blue dress. Then she held Gerald a little tighter. Carmen appeared in the doorway 1 second later. Her face a careful blank that cost her everything she had. "I'm so sorry," she said. "I'll take her right back." She crossed the room quickly, quietly, took Lily's small hand. Daniel had not moved. He was frozen, completely still, staring not at Carmen, not at Lily, but at Victoria. And Victoria, smoothing her napkin back onto her lap, said to the table, "I apologize. The staff boundaries have been a little loose lately. That will certainly be corrected." She said it pleasantly, like it was nothing, like it was less than nothing. Carmen walked out of that room without a single change in her expression. But the moment the kitchen door closed behind her, she crouched down to Lily's height, and held her daughter's face in both hands, and took one long steady breath. Lily patted her cheek. "It's okay, Mama." 3 years old. Carmen closed her eyes. In the dining room the conversation had resumed. Someone made a smooth remark. Someone laughed. The quartet had shifted to something lighter. Daniel Mercer had not spoken. He picked up his wine glass, set it back down, and stared at the door Carmen had walked through with an expression that no one at that table could read. Some moments don't announce themselves. They just arrive, and they divide your life into before and after. The dinner ended at 10. The guests filtered out in warm coats and town cars. The staff cleared the table, wrapped the leftovers, quietly disassembled the evening. Carmen had kept Lily in the back room for the rest of the night. Lily had fallen asleep on the small couch with Gerald tucked under her chin by 8:30, unbothered by the universe, perfectly at peace. Carmen had kept working. She was loading the last of the serving trays when Margaret appeared beside her and said very quietly, "He wants to see you." Carmen's hands stilled. "Now?" she asked. "When you're ready," Margaret said. And the way she said it, the way she didn't quite meet Carmen's eyes, told Carmen that this conversation was not going to be simple. He checked on Lily. Still sleeping. She smoothed her uniform, tucked a strand of hair back, took a breath. She walked to Daniel's study. He was standing at the window when she came in, looking out over the city. Manhattan glittered below him like something from a dream. He turned when she entered. She expected professional distance. A conversation about the evening. Perhaps a polite explanation that the arrangement, Lily coming occasionally, would need to change going forward. She was prepared for that. She had been preparing for it, honestly, since November. "Sit down, Carmen," he said. She sat. He didn't. He moved to the desk, leaned against it, crossed his arms. Not defensively, she thought, but like a man trying to hold something in while he figured out how to say it. "I want to apologize," he said, "for what was said tonight." Carmen shook her head immediately. "Mr. Mercer, you don't need to." "I know I don't need to," he said quietly. "I want to." He stopped. He looked at her for a long moment. "Lily has been coming here for 2 months," he said. "And in those 2 months she has knocked over 2 of my architectural models, relocated my television remote to a location that still hasn't been fully explained, and somehow convinced me to sit on the floor for 45 minutes building a train track I didn't know I owned. He paused. She calls me Dan. Carmen almost smiled. She had heard that. Lily could not manage the full name and had decided unilaterally that this man was Dan. She's not staff, Daniel said. She's a child. And she was spoken to in a way that was unacceptable. And I should have said so the moment it happened. Why didn't you? Carmen asked. Came out before she could stop it. Honest and direct and maybe too much. He was quiet for a moment. Because I was already understanding something I'd been trying not to understand, he said. The room was very still. I've been engaged to Victoria for 6 weeks, Daniel said. And in 6 weeks, I haven't once thought about whether she'd be kind to a child who wandered into a room she didn't belong in. He paused. Tonight I got my answer. Carmen looked at her hands. Mr. Mercer. Daniel, he said. She looked up. I've asked you 6 times, he said simply. You keep forgetting. There was a warmth in his voice that she had never let herself fully hear before, because she had not been able to afford it. There's something I need to tell you, he said. Something I should have told you, or maybe told myself, a long time ago. And then he said it. When I was 7 years old, my mother worked as a housekeeper for a family in Connecticut. We lived in their carriage house. I went to school in clothes that came from church donation bins. And one Christmas, their son told me that people like us didn't belong at real tables. Carmen's breath caught. I spent 30 years becoming someone who could buy every table in that boy's house, Daniel said. And tonight I sat at my own table and let someone say the same thing to a 3-year-old girl. He exhaled. I won't forget that. I need you to know that. Carmen felt the sting behind her eyes and absolutely refused it. The engagement is over, he said. I called Victoria after the guests left. She was surprised. I was not. Silence. I'm not telling you that because I expect anything, he said quickly, firmly. I want to be very clear about that. I'm telling you because you deserve to know that tonight was not acceptable, and it has been addressed. Lily is always welcome here. That will never be a question again. Carmen nodded. Good. Moved toward the door. Then stopped. She calls you Dan, Carmen said without turning around. Because the first time she tried your full name she got distracted by a dog outside the window and never came back to finish it. Then Daniel laughed. And it was the realest sound Carmen had heard in that apartment in 4 months. The most important things in life don't arrive in grand gestures. Sometimes they arrive in a burgundy velvet dress, holding a stuffed elephant named Gerald. The new year came in cold and quiet. Victoria Langston moved on with the elegance of a woman who had several backup plans and had already selected the best one. Page 6 noted the split with 2 tasteful sentences. The emerald-cut diamond disappeared from her social media within a week. Daniel did not give interviews. He did not explain. He simply redirected. He worked as he always had. Early mornings, long days. The relentless machinery of running something the size of Mercer Capital. But people close to him, Roy, Margaret, the small circle of staff who knew the penthouse rhythms, noticed something different. He was more present, less like a man waiting in his own life. 3 things happened in January that Margaret would later describe, in the quiet way of someone telling a story they've been waiting to tell, as the beginning of the real part. The first. Daniel asked Carmen if Lily had a pediatrician she was happy with. Carmen said the one covered by her insurance was adequate but difficult to get appointments with. Within a week, Lily had an appointment with one of the best pediatric practices in the city, all logistics handled by Daniel's executive assistant, all expenses covered with a note that said simply, "No argument. D." Carmen argued anyway. By text. For 20 minutes. Daniel's responses were brief, patient, and entirely unmoved. Lily's new doctor told Carmen her daughter was perfectly healthy and absolutely delightful. Carmen cried in the parking garage where no one could see her. The second, Daniel found Carmen studying at the kitchen table one evening when he came home unexpectedly. Her nursing school application was open on her laptop, the one she'd been quietly, doggedly working toward for 4 years between shifts and Lily's bedtimes and all the thousand edges of a life managed alone. He said nothing that night. But the following week, he asked Margaret for Carmen's schedule and rearranged it himself. Fewer morning hours, the afternoons freed up entirely. And a brief email arrived from a name Carmen didn't recognize, which turned out to be the head of a scholarship fund connected to a nursing program at NYU. The email said she had been nominated. It said her application was exceptional. It said they'd like to speak with her. Carmen called her sister. Her sister screamed loud enough that Carmen had to hold the phone away from her ear. Lily, who was building something architectural and important with her blocks nearby, looked up and said, "What happened, Mama?" "Something good," Carmen said, voice breaking a little. "Something really, really good." The third thing. On a Sunday in late January, Carmen arrived at the penthouse for a half-day shift. She let herself in with her keycard and found the living room rearranged. There was a small table near the big window, the south-facing one with the best light. On it was a children's coloring book, a box of crayons with Lily's name written on it in Daniel's handwriting, and a sticky note that said, "For Sundays, Dan." Carmen stood in front of that little table for a long time. She didn't cry. She had made a promise to herself that she would stop crying about this man. She was not entirely keeping that promise. Over the months that followed, things grew. Slowly, carefully, honestly, the way real things grow without shortcuts or pretending. There were Sunday afternoons at that little table, the three of them, Lily coloring with total commitment while Daniel and Carmen talked with the gradual ease of two people who are learning how to be fully known by someone. There were dinners eventually. Not the formal kind, just the kitchen kind, Carmen trying a new recipe while Lily stood on her step stool, helping, and Daniel sat on the counter eating what he described as quality control samples. There was a conversation one evening in March that started with Carmen saying, "I need you to understand what you're stepping toward," and Daniel saying, "I know exactly what I'm stepping toward," and Carmen saying, "She's part of everything," and Daniel saying, quietly, no hesitation, "I know. That's not the complicated part for me. The complicated part is making sure I deserve it." There was a moment in April when Lily, sitting on Daniel's shoulder so she could reach a butterfly mobile in a toy store, patted his head twice like she was checking the quality of it and said, "Good. It is good." Her full review. Her complete verdict. Daniel caught Carmen's eye over Lily's little swinging feet, and something passed between them that didn't need words. The world outside kept moving at its usual speed. The business pages still covered Mercer Capital. The city kept churning. People kept chasing the next thing, the next deal, the next version of success. But in a penthouse on the Upper East Side, on Sunday afternoons with crayons and good light and a stuffed elephant named Gerald present for most major life events, something quiet and extraordinary was being built. Not from money. Not from power. From showing up. From choosing kindness when cruelty would have been easier. From a little girl who walked into a formal dinner in her best velvet dress and reminded a man who'd spent 30 years becoming someone of exactly who he'd always been. Here is what this story taught me. We spend so much of our lives trying to sit at the right tables. Trying to become the kind of person who belongs in the right rooms with the right people. But the truth. The tables that matter most in this life are not the ones set with crystal and flowers and imported candles. They are the small ones. The ones near the south window with the good light. The ones with crayon marks on them. The ones where a little girl in pigtails holds your face in her two small hands and says, "It's okay, Mama," because she learned from watching you that love doesn't panic, love doesn't collapse, love steadies itself and keeps going. Victoria saw a servant's child. Daniel saw the whole universe. And that difference, that single, defining difference in how two people looked at the same little girl, said everything about who each of them truly was when no one was performing. Be the person who sees the child. Be the person who gets on the floor for the block towers. Be the person who, when something cruel is said about someone small and powerless, doesn't stay frozen. Be the table where everyone belongs. Because the kindest thing this world can offer isn't money or status, or any table in any penthouse in New York City. It's being seen. It's being told in words or in crayons or in a sticky note or in a step stool beside a kitchen sink. You belong here. You've always belonged here. If this story moved you the way it moved me to share it, give it a like. Not for the algorithm, but because stories like this one deserve to travel. They deserve to find the person who needs them tonight. Subscribe because every week I bring you stories like this one. Real, human, emotional stories that remind you what actually matters. And please share this one. Send it to someone who is doing everything alone right now. Someone who is working hard and feeling invisible. Someone who needs to hear that small kindnesses, quiet gestures, and a willingness to truly see another person can change an entire life. I'll see you in the next story.